Special budget meeting of the board of May 3, 2023 to order at 7 p.m. And I welcome members of the management team, Superintendent Eberwin, Secretary Treasurer Reed, Assistant Superintendent McKenzie, Director of Instruction Hunter, and online Director of Instruction Westhaver. I also welcome members of our partner groups from the Saanich Administrators Association, Mr. Aaron Buckham, welcome. From COPAX, the Confederation of Parent Advisory Councils of Saanich, the President, Ms. Megan Misovich, welcome Megan. From QP441, Ms. Nola Welsh, welcome Ms. Welsh. And I don't see Mr. Peterson of the Saanich Teachers Association, but should he and when he appears, I'll do my best to recognize him as well. I wish to acknowledge that we're meeting this evening on the traditional territory of the Wasanic people who have lived, worked, learned, and served as stewards of these lands since time immemorial. Make this acknowledgement respectfully and sincerely and as a gesture towards effecting reconciliation of our communities. Moving to item 2, trustees, is the agenda. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please? Trustee Vandal, seconded by Trustee Van Well, the 2 V trustees. In terms of amendments or revisions, Trustee McMurphy, please.
Yes, Chair, a question under 3.2, committee of the whole to discuss the 22-24 budget. I know we're in sort of a unique situation this year of I shouldn't have spoken before I move more. I'll seek agreement to deleting the committee of the whole because I think that we can have an informal discussion without necessarily going through the formalities of committee of the whole. If you would like to rule on that, I would appreciate it.
We don't, in my view, we don't need committee of the whole, which unnecessarily may, in some views, unnecessarily complicate things because we then move into committee of the whole. Typically, the vice chair then leads that portion, and that's what's behind your motion, isn't it, Trustee? I know you're trying to get out of work, and then recommendations made in committee are transmitted back to the board when the chair resumes the role. It's a bit, in my view, unnecessarily complicated if the chair is prepared to provide some generosity to the body and to partner representatives. What it means, committee of the whole would act like a committee, and principally the rules would be less stringent as to frequency of speaking, as to partners speaking, and so forth. So if Trustee McMurphy's agreement is met by trustees that we delete that and continue as the board, I would adopt that approach to ensure that we have full discussion. Does that make sense, folks?
As long as everybody, including our partners, feels welcome to do this.
And if this is agreed, I would emphasize that again at the time. Thank you. So is there agreement with Trustee McMurphy's suggestion that we delete committee of the whole and continue as the board, and that we welcome not interminable debate among the board, but we wouldn't be restricted to 2 comments per issue, for instance, or per motion, and we would be able to hear from our partners too on a reasonable basis. I can see Mr. Buckham winding up already. If they wish to contribute. So does anyone object to that? Are we clear on that? All right, thank you. Trustee Elder.
A question on that, 2 actually, would 3.2 remain without committee of the whole and just become discussion of 22-24 budget?
Yes.
And the other is, would the chair be allowing for a free-flowing discussion prior to motions being put on the floor, after which the rules would apply, speaking twice and so on?
I think we can include some free-flowing discussion on a preliminary basis, Trustee Elder. And I think we only need to move into the typical stringent rules under policy, the board operations policy, when when we're debating the actual motions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, are there any other suggestions, amendments, revisions to the agenda? All in favor of adopting the agenda with that change? Any opposed? The motion's carried. Thank you, Trustee McMurphy. We'll move then to item 3, the 2023-24 budget. And the first item there is the report from the Secretary Treasurer. So I'll invite you to comment, Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Chair. The Budget Advisory Committee met a week ago today on April 26th. And at that meeting, the committee reviewed the results of the community budget consultation, and that community budget consultation included the community budget meeting, the results of the survey, and results from student voice meetings and other meetings. Following that discussion, the committee discussed a recommendation for balancing budget 2023-24. And I've noted in the committee notes some items that were discussed. One included a concern raised by the COPAX representative regarding allocation of $200,000 from the food programs to fund existing program expenditures. This was a proposed allocation of that targeted funding to existing qualifying expenditures in order to reduce operating budget pressure. This concern was discussed and committee members agreed that this was a concern. The committee also discussed advocacy and potentially the idea of joint communications to parents from COPAX and the school district. So following a robust discussion, the committee agreed to present the following recommendations for consideration by the Board of Education. And there are 5 recommendations, and they're outlined in the committee notes from that meeting. The first one is that the 23-24 preliminary budget be balanced without reflecting program reductions by allocating to the extent necessary contingency reserve and to the extent possible underspend of 22-23 service and supply budgets. The second recommendation is that program budgets not be increased beyond the essential inflationary adjustments already reflected in the calculated net unfunded inflationary pressure of $1,683,000. The third recommendation was that during 23-24, any additional funding, including from enrollment growth relative to forecast, be applied to reduce budget pressure to the extent possible. The fourth recommendation is that the district conduct a review of programs early in 23-24, considering where budget reductions are feasible to inform cost reduction measures to be implemented in future budgets as required. And the fifth recommendation is that the board advocate at all levels for funding for inflationary cost pressures. That concludes my report on the process. There was more information in the budget advisory report on the specific feedback received through the consultation, and I'm happy to answer questions at this time.
Right, thank you, Mr. Reid. And so, as I indicated, this is the time where we can, before motions are placed on the floor, we can indulge ourselves in some discussion about the issue. We can put questions to the Secretary Treasurer on his report and on the recommendation. And the matters along that theme. Trustee Elder.
Thank you, Chair. I want to take the liberty of speaking first on this. Chair of Finance, Facilities and Technology and the Chair of the Budget Advisory Committee. And start with my expression of appreciation on behalf of, I know, all concerned to Secretary Treasurer Reid, Director Smaglia, and all those involved in the background work leading us to this place where there's a coherent set of materials in front of the board to consider in regard to move toward a balanced budget. I think that that appreciation has been expressed many times, but one more can't hurt because it's a lot of work and it's extraordinarily well done and it's appreciated by all. I also want to just indicate that when the time is right, I do plan to move that staff be requested to bring back a balanced budget proposal for May 17th based on items 1, 2, and 3 that were read. And further, I would move subsequent to that, eventually, I plan to move items 4 and 5 separate from the budget deliberation because those are more future process items. So with that notice of sorts, I look forward to hearing the informal discussion, and when the time is right, I'll put those motions on the floor.
Thank you, Trustee Allen. And partners, please remember that we are proceeding less formally than we otherwise might at this stage. So if you wish to make any comments about Secretary Treasurer's report or the process of balancing the budget and the proposals, please put your hand up. Attract my attention somehow, I'll acknowledge you. Trustees, is there any debate, any comment, or questions for Mr. Reid? Any discussion? Trustee Van Wel.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't there for the last Budget Advisory Council or meeting, but, and I do understand the concern that COPAX has about the allocation of $200,000 for that would be going towards existing expenditures. If we were to not do that, would that mean that our budget pressures would be an additional $200,000?
Mr. Reid.
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Further questions or comment? Trustee Miller.
It's more, I guess, asking for speculation rather than anything else. It's the extent to which we are drawing on our reserves to balance our budget. Does that give the Ministry of Education and the government an easy out? In other words, by solving the problem this year, creating a bigger problem for next year, but solving the problem for this year, are we at the same time reducing the pressure on the government to deal with these underfunded or inflationary costs that are not being funded?
Mr. Reid.
Yes, through the chair, and thank you for the question. That is a good question, and I've thought about that question in as it relates to how this plays out longer term, because I think it is true that to some extent government is being able to balance its provincial budget and have school districts balance their budget by effectively tapping into our reserves, and most school districts have built up reserves because, as many of you know, a number of years ago, the Ministry of Education directed school districts to develop policy around establishing a contingency reserve as a prudent measure for sound financial planning. And so, as our budget process played out, I was actually a little bit surprised that I didn't see more noise in the media around. We did see some concern with reductions that were necessary in the Victoria School District, but I thought it would have been we would have heard about it from more school districts. But I have learned over the last few weeks that a number of school districts have done exactly what's being proposed today, balance their budget with one-time reserves. And I know that the Cowichan School District, their board recently adopted their budget, and they we're required to allocate $2.6 million out of reserves to balance. And numerous other districts that I'm aware of are in the same boat. And so it's definitely an issue that needs to be addressed at some point.
So, I mean, boards have to adopt a budget by June 30th. And we're getting, I mean, it's not next week, but it's not far off. We've been hoping that the government will come through with funding the costs that they have suggested we assume of the inflationary increases to all of our salary categories. The two questions. One is, do you think that there's any chance of them funding those increases that they have suggested we provide in keeping with the increases that were obtained through negotiation by the two unionized employee groups? And then I'll stop there for now. Other questions?
Good question. At this stage, we have not received any official confirmation that inflationary salary adjustments for exempt staff will be funded. There is, I would say, optimism in the sector, and that this is something the government will fund because it was something that they did fund last year, and so we are hopeful that this is something that is going to be funded, but at this time we don't have confirmation.
Do you remember what the timing was last time? I mean, I'm feeling anxious because we're getting close to budget, June 30th, which is the top dead date for budget adoption. But I mean, if we get the money, we can always add it to the budget. That's not a problem. But I'm just wondering what kind of, in your opinion, what kind of game is the government playing here?
The timing was quite different last year because the exempt compensation policy direction was tied in with the completion of the collective agreements. So for last year, it actually didn't happen until January, kind of midway through the year, whereas it was retroactive. Whereas this year, we have collective agreements in place, so we have a good idea of what the inflationary adjustments will also be for exempt staff, but at this point we don't have the confirmation of it. And I wouldn't be able to speculate as for the reason for that.
I was going to move in, suggest that the board look at possibly communicating with government, kind of a heads up notice that, okay, we made it through this year, but it is at the expense of next year. But I think we should wait till the fall perhaps for that kind of engagement with government. But I think when in the past we've been doing our budgeting kind of post-Christmas. I know you work on all year long, but in terms of the engagement with the board and our communities and whatnot, it tends to get focused after Christmas. But I'm thinking that we may need to start working on our next year's budget and our advocacy around that a lot sooner than the spring of 2024. But we'll see what happens in the next few weeks with regard to any additional funding.
Sure.
Yeah, and that was actually discussed at Budget Advisory Committee with respect to the fourth recommendation, which was to conduct a review of programs considering whether budget reductions are feasible. So the committee, through that discussion, inserted the phrase in early 23-24. So the intention is to have that information and understanding early in the fall.
I'm adding the advocacy motion to that too.
Anything further, Trustee Miller? Trustee Hickman?
I think I'll pass for now. Thank you, Chair.
I'm not sure there's anyone to pass to.
Oh.
So unless someone wishes to take you up on it. Sorry. Ms. Visovich, I see your little yellow hand. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm not there in person. Just a question. If I think I was following the last conversation that the inflationary costs for salaries may be covered, and just wondering if that's correct, would the salary money that's coming out of the Feeding Futures money be reallocated back to cover other program costs? I'm just wondering, it sounds like we're robbing Peter to pay Paul for some of these things moving around. So I wonder if we're going to lose the money anyways, if it's better just to come out of regular reserves and not out of the potentially earmarked food money. Thank you.
Mr. Reed?
Yeah, through the chair. So the current budget pressure is 1,683,000, I believe, and of that, 470,000 ish relates to exempt compensation. And so if that part is funded, that would reduce the unfunded inflationary pressure to 1.22 million, just over 1.2 million. So there is still a significant unfunded inflationary pressure. So the presumption would be that it would be, if that amount is funded, it would be a reduction to what is coming out of the contingency reserve. But of course, that can be revisited by the board at any time in the development of the amended budget.
Any follow-up, Ms. Piscadich?
No, thank you. I didn't really get it, but that's okay. It sounds like it's not going to work.
Great, thank you. Trustee Elder?
In the spirit of a free-flowing dialogue, I want to think aloud for a minute about the numbers and make sure that I've got them straight. The last we saw from April 24th was that the anticipated contingency reserve for this year would be $1.8 million. I assume that's still roughly accurate, of which 1.683 million is being proposed to be pulled into balancing the budget, along with the 200,000 from the food program to fund current staffing positions to offset the total pressure for next year of 1.883. No, that's right. Which leaves $117,000 roughly in the contingency reserve for next year. If 1.8 is having 1.683 taken out of it. And I reflected on Chair Dunford's comments at the last budget advisory about how contingency reserves are for unforeseen exigencies and unforeseen pressures and challenges, usually arising in the fall. We'd have $100,000 to deal with those unforeseen challenges next year, which is frightening from an economic or from finance point of view. So I would hope that if any funds become available, including funding of the exempt staff salary increase, that go into the contingency reserve and stay there. And if during the year there's an opportunity to discuss the pressures that arise during next year with respect to the contingency, and the board has a desire to spend some of it down in regard to those pressures, one of those might be that $200,000 that Ms. Vick has spoken about so clearly over the last while. And as her colleague did at the last budget advisory. So I don't think there's any way to make promises to what the contingency would be used for, unless it stays at $100,000, and then the promise would be nothing. $100,000 gets you nothing against a $100 million budget. But $500,000 or $600,000 might get you something. I would be surprised if it resulted in the board moving $200,000 back to the food program. I think there will be other more pressing needs, as important as that is. And I think it's also important to try to retain some for future years, try to build that contingency back up over $1 million in whatever way is possible next year. So that's all to say that I'm going to surprise myself and eventually when it comes to motion, reluctantly support the spending down of the entire contingency. And part of it is strategic because I think we do need to show our funder that we have emptied the savings account to balance the budget. And then go about the process of informing, advocating, educating around why that's the case. $1 million of unfunded inflation, $2 million of unfunded additional replacement costs. And there's millions of dollars that are unfunded that are causing us to have to use all of the reserve. And I think we do have to, and I think this is strategically wise to do so, even though it's fiscally unwise to do so. I know how hard it must be for the Secretary Treasurer to recommend that there be a contingency of $100,000 when it really should be 3 million. What's a good number? 3% of a budget. So if we do get some good news, I would be supporting going forward the retention of that good news money, wherever it comes from, in the contingency to bring it back up to something approximating adequate.
Thank you, Trustee Allen. Mr. Reid?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add on that, the forecast of a closing contingency of roughly $117,000 is definitely uncomfortable. It is what we're hoping is the worst case scenario. We are hoping that we finish the year in a better position than that. And I've spoken about this in previous meetings. There are a number of things that can change, right? Our enrollment can be higher relative to forecast, and we could see a change in the trend of sick and illness leave. And in fact, we are seeing a little bit of a moderation in there that will probably be favorable, a little bit favorable in the next forecast. However, even if we finish with $1.5 million in the contingency reserve, that will mean that we used $1 million of it this year, which means we're on an unsustainable path. And so I think that, you know, when we're trying to balance a $100 million budget on a razor's edge, which is what happens in school districts, you know, we do have to acknowledge, recognize that things can vary from what we're forecasting, and because of that, we are forecasting conservatively. It doesn't mean it's impossible for it to be worse, but we are conservative, so we are hoping that our financial position will be better at the end of the year.
Thank you. Further discussion? Trustee Hickman, did you wish to come back to pass? Did you wish to?
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, Trustee Elder actually very succinctly read my mind and spoke for me.
Partners, trustees, is there further discussion before we go to the motions? All right, I think the time is right, Trustee Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I move that the board, I'll use the word request rather than direct. I don't think we need to be directed. Request that senior staff prepare a balanced budget for consideration by the board on May 17th on the following 3 principles. 1, that the 2023-24 preliminary budget be balanced without reflecting program budget reductions by allocating to the extent necessary contingency reserve and to the extent possible underspend of 2022-23 service and supply budgets. 2, that program budgets not be increased beyond the essential inflationary adjustments already reflected in the calculated net unfunded inflationary pressure of $1,683,000. 3, that during 2023-24, any additional funding, including from enrollment growth relative to forecast, be applied to reduce the budget pressures to the extent possible.
Is there a seconder? Trustee Silzer. Trustee Elder?
I think it's been spoken to.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll put the question. Trustees clear? All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried.
Chair, if I may, a follow-up motion. You'll note that I'm going to take the liberty to add 3 words to number 5 as it was presented. And I'm sorry to do this at the last moment because we've talked about this so much.
And you'll see why when I get there, and you may or may not agree to support these additional words. I move that the district conduct a review of programs early in 2023-24, considering where budget reductions are feasible to inform cost reduction measures to be implemented in future budgets as required. And that the board advocate at all levels for funding of inflationary and other unfunded cost pressures. My addition of and other unfunded, I hope is supportable because it's not just inflation that causes this.
Can you repeat that for us, Trustee Elder? The board advocated
at all levels for funding of inflationary and other unfunded cost pressures.
Thank you. Seconded. Trustee Van Well. Trustee Elder.
I believe we've spoken to this tonight and at other times, Chair. I think it speaks for itself.
Other discussion? Right, all in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Trustee Elder, anything further? Is there anything further from anybody? Mr. Peterson, is Mr. Peterson with us?
He is.
Don? Where is he? Mr. Peterson has sent us a comment.
Oh, there he is.
There you are. Is
Yes.
your mic on? There, Don.
Oops, you just muted yourself again, Don.
There we go. Yes, I am here. I'm on duty this evening, so I'm running around the house chasing kids. So I've been listening, but I haven't been able to participate as I would like.
Well, we appreciate that you've got a moment to deal with us.
Great, and I appreciate that we're able to balance the budget this year without cuts to services to students. It is disappointing. It needs to come from contingency. And that we are, as already discussed, we're potentially postponing a challenging budgeting process to another year. But at least we do have another year to advocate for the unfunded pressures. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. So true. Trustees, I'm advised that staff has received the direction through the adopted motions necessary to prepare the budget for the board's consideration on May 17th. And so in that sense, there's no further business we're required to consider this evening, and the agenda is completed. Is there any objection to adjourning the special meeting at this time? Hearing none, I declare we're adjourned. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your work. Thank you, guests, for your participation and attendance as well.
A half-hour budget meeting.
No, what's else?
Good night.